be it fortunate or unfortunate, Cameron Lee and I share a love for old-time musicals. And as I read Cameron's excellent paper and a compelling paper on integration and integrity and peacemaking, and those things just kept on bombarding me, I was taken with the idea that he proposed that theological and psychological education often results in rocking the boat for those who have enough bravery to participate. And so I couldn't help but think of Stubby Kaye singing in the movie Guys and Dolls his nicely version of "Sit Down, You're Rocking the Boat." So in that spirit, Cameron, I'd like to add my advice. The people all said, sit down, you're rocking the boat. The people all said, sit down, you're rocking the boat. And the devil will drag you under by the sharp lapels of your checkered coat. Sit down, you're rocking the boat. Sit down, you're rocking the boat. Yes, Cameron Lee, by nature, is a boat rocker. I appreciate the meticulous way that Cameron points out what integration means and the differentiation, particularly between interdisciplinary approaches versus an intradisciplinary integration. He states it bringing the X and Y together in a coherent whole. When I read that X and Y analogy, I immediately thought of this wholeness or newness that comes together from an X and Y meeting in procreation. What's required of both in order to yield a brand new human being? First, procreation, the two gametes have to lose a significant portion of their stuff, of who they are and what they are. When the gametes meet, they represent exactly half of the original genetic code. I think that that's cool. Secondly, and perhaps even more germane here, is when the gametes come together to complete the new genetic code, there's a randomness of the coming together. We did not receive the best traits of both of our parents. Indeed, we received a random selection of those traits of our parents. I think this holds guidance to us as we consider the integration of theology and psychology. As Cameron reminds us, we do not have a picture of the puzzle. So it must be random by creation in both fields. Both psychology and theology cannot bring all their pieces to the table if we're going to be able to put it together. It bears reminding us that this is a good thing. Like science and art, which in my mind both are seeking beauty and truth, each explains and illuminates things that the other cannot. Science can tell us about and measure the physiology changes when a person encounters the one that they love. But it takes the poet who can illuminate the beauty and express it. This love of ours is as fresh as a morning glory, kissed by the dew, and in harmony it rides with the timeless chariot's turn. May it always be so. Psychology and theology have a way of coming together, both bringing what they can to the table, but combining in a random way that can make it, both fields, much stronger if we keep the idea of an intrapsychological, intradisciplinary approach that Cameron is suggesting. As I mentioned, I love Cameron's idea that integration and education rocks the boat. Integrity, as Cameron explains it, is based in trust, consistency, and reliability. But the wild card here, and I want to remind us, this is a very powerful wild card. is all this personality development and personal development takes place in the context of learning, challenging what has always been thought or the presuppositions one carries is at the crux of learning. This is where we hit a truly interdisciplinary nature of integration, a coming together of not just the psychological and theological, but also being integrated with the integrity of being and becoming being. It's destabilizing, in other words, because it is supposed to be destabilizing. This is essential in development and growth and essential in learning. However, it's also important to point out that this boat rocking does not carry the purpose of capsizing totally the personhood of the individual, and not to have him or her hold on to any part of the consistent call or the value in the midst of this growth. Integration with integrity always points toward developing, but not toward chaos of losing self. I like Cameron's reference to the figure of the aspects of theological reflection and formation, and I think it illustrates many points very well. It seems to me, however, that as helpful as the diagram is in terms of pointing out the different influences, the actual development is much more patterned. We live and embody theology and psychology in the context of the corporate, and then make sense of that individually, what it means to us personally. We can do it in the opposite sequence, but the point here is that we usually do not, nor can we easily do it at the same time. The same is true with the focal and subsidiary awareness. Developmentally, we most often have to learn from the focal to command the process, and only then can we move to the subsidiary. We do need both, but it's more patterned than happening simultaneously. The danger is if we do not engage these elements in a patterned way, we stop our developmental processes, in other words. It does not stop the challenges to our identities or our senses of safeties. And if we reject the other influences of learning because we already know what or how we believe, we lose. We lose a lot. However, if we also lose if we become unrecognizable to ourselves just because the world teaches us a particular new and exciting way. Balancing seems essential in the model, as well as being developmentally patterned. Pattern in a causal, learning manner perpetuates balance and suggests a more sound pedagogy, particularly when we come to integration. To further this point just a bit more, I very much appreciated the metaphor about the concert pianist. Yes, both forms of awareness, focal and subsidiary, must be in play, but the balance of the two is learned in a patterned way. First, heavily concentrating on the focal points of notes and rhythm, and then as more and more growth and familiarity takes place, it becomes more and more subsidiary in our awareness. Many concert musicians would describe the real joy of performance in this subsidiary dimension is when the focal dimension is patterned into the subsidiary so much that now the focal awareness is free to become in connection with the performance itself, the venue, and the audience. One way we could consider making our integration sounder pedagogically is to move into this natural developmental pattern, which promotes growth and lessens chaos of moving in all directions of the diagram at the same time. It would also add to this idea that Cameron points out of a narrative coherence. I like this concept and the description of narrative coherence. It felt to me, however, the four types of narratives were primarily individual in nature and not bent toward the corporate or the communal. Particularly in terms of identity narrative, I feel more attention has to be paid to this communal perspective and not just the experience of the individual in the community. For instance, my community holds much of the narrative about my identity where I am unaware or I've forgotten, like being driven past the place where I was born or being told by my caregivers about my personhood when I was just a toddler. Think about how communally we hold the identity of those in our community that have Alzheimer's. We hold their identity for them instead of them holding it for themselves. This is particularly true and impactful when it comes to our vocation. Our communities have knowledge of us that we cannot or will not see that shapes us if we are willing to listen. Like my major professor, Glenn Jennings, he was an Oklahoma boy, and he used to look at me and he used to say, "Terry, you're a fine human being." Glenn Jennings helped me believe in myself what I could not see at the time and resulted in me becoming more than what I ever imagined I could be. It's a process of pattern that forms a narrative with integrity. I very much like also how this is put into context by Cameron in the section on life's story of following Christ, requiring a transcendent dimension. This also seems to move effectively into an intradisciplinary approach between psychology and theology. For instance, when the rich young ruler asked Jesus about the important commandments, Jesus confirms the theological answer in line with the primary calling. However, then Christ turns the table on the rich man. He asks for a psychological commitment that entails both primary and secondary vocation. One thing more. Sell all you have. Come, give it to the poor. Come, follow me. This kind of ultimate integrity of integration is what Cameron is pointing us toward. I like the idea pointed out also that peace and peacemaking is not just an absence of conflict, and by logic, an absence of want. It's fulfilling and building a life of love and trustworthiness. Clearly, this is a choice. Just not what to do, but what to do in our lives that make a difference that is constructive to the process of loving and trustworthy. I'm reminded of this passage over and over again as I read that kind of choice of what peacemaking means out of Romans 8, verses 5 and 6. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. To set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. There it is, the shalom that is so rich of what we're after. Only by making those choices do we clearly enter into the realm of being constructive and not just the absence of conflict. And one final note. I love that Cameron tears apart, like only Cameron can, those verses in Jeremiah. I love the idea of Jeremiah and seeking the shalom of the city, for it's in the shalom of the city that we find our shalom. It strikes me as a final point that this seeking the welfare of the city in Jeremiah's time would have largely excluded a theological language. It was rather an integrative language that was economic, political, intellectual, yes, even psychological and theological. Yet it is clear from the perspective of Jeremiah, the passage is seeking the shalom of the city, and that methodology was intradisciplinary in its endeavor of integrating the theology and psychology as one whole. And that, my friends, is what integrity is about. Thank you.